Take this dying animal and get out of my sight. 15 years of your miserable life wasted working for me. And this is all you deserve. A rich factory owner paid his most loyal worker with a sick, dying donkey that could barely stand on its own legs. The man had given 15 years of sweat, blood, and broken bones to build his boss's empire, and this was his reward. A creature everyone expected to be dead by sunrise. But what that cruel boss didn't know was that God had placed something extraordinary inside that dying donkey. Something that would turn a curse into a blessing, a punishment into a miracle, and bring the most powerful man in the region crawling on his knees, begging the worker he had humiliated. This is the story of a faithful servant, a dying donkey, and the miracle that proved God never forgets those who are mistreated. In a bustling town at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, there lived a humble man named Tobias. He was 47 years old, with a face weathered by decades of hard labor and hands that told stories of endless work. His back was permanently curved from years of carrying loads too heavy for any man. His knees ached with every step. His eyes, once bright with youthful hope, had dimmed to a quiet resignation that comes from a life of serving others while receiving nothing in return. Tobias had come to this town as a young man of 32, fleeing a drought that had destroyed his family's small farm in a distant village. His wife, Hannah, had died giving birth to their only child, a daughter named Miriam, who had survived only 3 days before joining her mother in heaven. With nothing left to live for and nothing left to lose, Tobias had walked for weeks until he reached this town, hoping to find work, hoping to find purpose, hoping to find some reason to keep breathing. He found work at the largest textile factory in the region, owned by a man named Marcus Blackwood. The factory produced fine fabrics that were sold throughout the land, making Marcus one of the wealthiest men for 100 miles. His mansion sat on a hill overlooking the town like a castle, a constant reminder to everyone below of who held the power. Marcus had inherited the factory from his father, who had built it with fair wages and honest dealings. But Marcus was nothing like his father. Where his father had been generous, Marcus was greedy. Where his father had been kind, Marcus was cruel. Where his father had seen workers as partners, Marcus saw them as tools to be used and discarded. Tobias started as a simple loader, carrying heavy bales of cotton from the delivery wagons to the storage rooms. It was back-breaking work that paid barely enough to rent a small room and buy bread. But Tobias never complained. He showed up before dawn and left after dark. He volunteered for the jobs no one else wanted. He worked through illness, through injury, through days when his body screamed for rest. And slowly, over the years, he became indispensable. Marcus noticed Tobias, not because he appreciated him, but because he could exploit him. He promoted Tobias to floor supervisor, which sounded impressive, but came with twice the work and only a tiny increase in pay. He made Tobias responsible for training new workers, fixing broken machines, and meeting impossible production quotas. And whenever something went wrong, Marcus would blame Tobias publicly, humiliating him in front of the other workers to maintain control through fear. 15 years passed this way. 15 years of Tobias giving everything and receiving almost nothing. 15 years of watching Marcus grow richer while the workers grew poorer. 15 years of swallowing his pride, biting his tongue, and telling himself that someday, somehow, things would be different. But Marcus had a secret that even Tobias didn't know. The factory was failing. Years of cutting corners, cheating suppliers, and mistreating workers had finally caught up with him. Orders were being cancelled. Quality had plummeted. And Marquis, who had spent lavishly on his mansion, his carriages, and his lifestyle, was running out of money. He needed to cut costs dramatically, and that meant getting rid of his highest-paid workers. Starting with Tobias. One cold autumn morning, Marcus summoned Tobias to his office. Tobias climbed the stairs with a sense of unease, knowing that nothing good ever came from a meeting with the boss. The office was decorated with expensive paintings and plush furniture, a stark contrast to the dingy factory floor where Tobias spent his days. Marcus sat behind a massive oak desk, his fingers steepled, his eyes cold. "Tobias?" Marcus said without any greeting. "You've worked here for 15 years." "Yes, sir," Tobias replied, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. 15 years is a long time," Marcus continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Too long, perhaps. You're not as young as you used to be. Not as fast. Not as useful. Tobias felt his heart sink. He knew what was coming. "I'm letting you go," Marcus said, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Effective immediately. Clean out your locker and leave by noon." Tobias stood frozen, unable to process the words. 15 years. 15 years of his life given to this man, this factory, this dream of someday having enough saved to buy a small piece of land and live out his remaining years in peace. And now it was all being ripped away with a single sentence. "But sir," Tobias finally managed, "my wages. I'm owed 3 months of back pay." "You promised." Marcus laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Promised? I don't recall promising anything, but since I'm a generous man, I'll give you something for your years of service." He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing toward the stable behind the factory. "You see that donkey out there? The gray one that can barely stand. It's been sick for months. Veterinarian says it'll be dead within a week. You can have it. Consider it your retirement gift." Tobias looked out the window. In the stable yard, he could see a small gray donkey, thin and weak, its head hanging low. Even from this distance, he could tell the animal was suffering. "Sir," Tobias said, his voice barely above a whisper, "that animal is dying. It's not worth anything." Marcus turned back to him with eyes as cold as ice. "Then you should feel right at home with it. You're both worthless now. Take the donkey and go, or leave without it. I don't care. Either way." The other workers watched in silence as Tobias walked out of the factory for the last time. Some looked away, ashamed but too afraid to speak up. Others whispered among themselves, knowing that any of them could be next. Marcus stood at his office window, watching with satisfaction as another problem walked out of his life. Tobias approached the dying donkey slowly. The animal was in terrible condition, its ribs visible through matted gray fur, its eyes clouded with pain and exhaustion. Open sores covered its legs, and its breathing was labored and shallow. It looked like it would collapse at any moment. Any sensible person would have walked away. The donkey was clearly dying. Caring for it would cost money. Tobias, and even if it survived, what good was a sick, old donkey to a man who had just lost everything? But Tobias wasn't thinking about practicality. He was thinking about the look in the donkey's eyes, the same look he had seen in his own reflection for 15 years, the look of a creature that had been used up, worn out, and thrown away by someone who had never valued it. "Come on, friend," Tobias said softly, untying the rope that held the donkey to the post. "We're both done here. Let's go." The donkey lifted its head slightly and looked at Tobias, and in that moment, something passed between them. A recognition, a connection. Two broken souls, meeting at the bottom of their lives, each seeing in the other a mirror of their own suffering. Tobias led the donkey away from the factory, away from the life he had known for 15 years, away from everything. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know how he would survive. He only knew that he couldn't leave this creature to die alone, any more than he could leave himself to die alone. The townspeople watched as Tobias walked through the streets with his dying donkey. Some laughed openly. "Look at old Tobias," they mocked. 15 years of work, and all he got was a dying animal. Others shook their heads with pity. Poor fool. He should just let it die and move on. Even the children joined in, throwing pebbles and calling the donkey names. But Tobias kept walking. He had nowhere to go, so he walked to the edge of town, to an abandoned shed that had once been used to store hay. It wasn't much, just for walls and a leaky roof, but it was shelter. He laid down some old straw for the donkey and sat beside it, wondering what to do next. That night, as the cold crept in and the stars appeared one by one, Tobias did something he hadn't done in years. Hey. Lord, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I don't understand why you've brought me here. I don't understand why everything I've worked for has been taken away. But I know you see me. I know you haven't forgotten me. Please, if it's your will, give me the strength to keep going. And please, help this poor creature that's been cast aside just like me. The donkey let out a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and rested its head on Tobias's lap. Tobias stroked its matted fur and made a silent promise. Whatever happened, he would not abandon this animal. They would face whatever came together. Over the following weeks, Tobias poured everything he had into saving the donkey. He spent his last coins on medicine and clean water. He foraged in the forests for herbs that he remembered his grandmother using to treat sick animals. He cleaned the donkey's wounds with careful, gentle hands. He fed it small amounts of grain mixed with honey, coaxing it to eat when it had no appetite. The townspeople continued to mock him. They called him crazy, foolish, a man who had lost his mind along with his job. Some said it was a waste of resources. Others said it was pathetic, a grown man caring for a worthless animal as if it were a child. But Tobias didn't listen to them. He had stopped listening to what the world thought of him a long time ago. He knew only one thing. This donkey had been placed in his path for a reason, and he would not give up on it. And then, slowly, miraculously, the donkey began to heal. It started with small signs. The clouded eyes began to clear. The labored breathing became easier. The wounds started to close. The donkey ate more eagerly, drank more readily, and began to lift its head with something that looked almost like hope. 3 months after Tobias had received his dying payment, the donkey was standing on its own. Its coat, once matted and dull, had begun to shine. Its legs, once covered in sores, had healed completely, and its spirit, once broken and defeated, had been reborn. Tobias named the donkey Grace, because that's what it was. Grace in the midst of despair, a gift he didn't deserve but had received anyway. But the miracles were only beginning. One morning, as Tobias led Grace through the town to fetch water from the well, something strange happened. A woman approached them, her face etched with worry. Her young son was sick, she explained, burning with a fever that no medicine could break. She had heard that donkey's milk could sometimes help sick children, and she was desperate enough to try anything. Tobias hesitated. Grace had only recently recovered, and he wasn't sure if she was strong enough to produce milk, but the desperation in the woman's eyes was impossible to ignore. He led Grace back to the shed and tried to milk her, not expecting much, but what came out was unlike anything he had ever seen. The milk was rich and creamy, almost golden in color, with a sweetness that seemed almost supernatural. Tobias filled a small cup and gave it to the woman, who rushed home to her dying son. The next morning, the woman returned with tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of grief, they were tears of joy. He's healed, she sobbed, grasping Tobias's hands. The fever broke within hours of drinking the milk. My son is alive. It's a miracle. Word spread quickly through the town. The dying donkey that Marcus Blackwood had given as a cruel joke had milk that could heal the sick. At first, people were skeptical, but as more and more sick children were brought to Tobias, and as more and more of them recovered after drinking Grace's milk, the skepticism turned to wonder, and the wonder turned to faith. People came from neighboring towns and distant villages. They brought their sick children, their elderly parents, their suffering loved ones, and Grace, the donkey that everyone had expected to die, produced enough milk for all of them. It never ran out. It never lost its power. Day after day, miracle after miracle, the healing continued. Tobias didn't charge anything for the milk. He couldn't bring himself to profit from what he believed was a gift from God. But the grateful families insisted on giving him something in return. Some brought food, others brought clothes. A few pressed coins into his hands, refusing to leave until he accepted. And slowly, Tobias's situation began to improve. He repaired the shed. He bought proper feet for Grace. He even managed to save a little money for the first time in his life. But not everyone was happy about Tobias's unexpected fortune. Marcus Blackwood had been watching from his mansion on the hill. His factory had continued to decline, and his debts had mounted. He had been forced to sell his expensive furniture, his prized paintings, his luxurious carriages. And now, as he looked down at the crowds gathering around Tobias's humble shed, rage burned in his chest. "That donkey was mine," he muttered to himself. "Whatever power it has, it belongs to me. I will take it back." He sent his men to reclaim the donkey, but the townspeople blocked their path. "The animal belongs to Tobias," they said. "Marcus Blackwood threw it away. He has no claim to it now." Furious, Marcus took the matter to court. He argued that the donkey had been loaned, not given. He claimed that Tobias had stolen the animal. He demanded its return, along with all the money Tobias had received from grateful families. But the judge was not swayed. Marcus had witnesses, but so did Tobias. Worker after worker testified about how Marcus had publicly humiliated Tobias, how he had called the donkey worthless, how he had given it as a final insult rather than paying the wages he owed. The judge ruled in Tobias's favor. The donkey belonged to him, legally and morally. And more than that, the judge ordered Marcus to pay the 3 months of back wages he had withheld, plus damages for the public humiliation. Marcus was ruined. The court order, combined with his mounting debts, forced him to sell the factory. The workers he had mistreated for years now owned the place, having pooled their resources to buy it at auction. Marcus was left with nothing but his crumbling mansion and his bitter pride. But the story wasn't over yet. 1 year after Tobias had been thrown out of the factory, a terrible plague swept through the region. It struck without warning, killing livestock and leaving families without the means to plow their fields or transport their goods. The economy collapsed. People faced starvation, and at the center of the devastation was Marcus Blackwood. His remaining horses had died. His servants had fled. His mansion, which had once been the envy of the town, was now cold and empty. Marcus himself had fallen ill, not with the plague that killed animals, but with a sickness of the spirit that had been festering for years. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He wandered his empty halls like a ghost, haunted by the choices he had made and the lives he had destroyed. One night, driven by desperation and something that might have been the first stirrings of conscience, Marcus did something he had never done before. He walked down from his hill. He walked through the town he had once ruled, and he walked to the shed where Tobias lived with Grace. Tobias was sitting outside, watching the stars, when he saw the figure approaching. Even in the darkness, he recognized the walk, the posture, the arrogance that had been humbled but not entirely erased. Marcus Blackwood, the man who had taken 15 years of his life and repaid him with an insult, was standing before him. "What do you want?" Tobias asked. His voice, neither angry nor welcoming. Simply tirade, Marcus fell to his knees. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was the collapse of a man who had nothing left. "I'm dying," Marcus whispered. "Not my body. My soul. I've destroyed everything I touched. I've hurt everyone who ever worked for me. I've spent my whole life taking, and now I have nothing." He looked up at Tobias, and for the first time, there were tears in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve anything from you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm asking anyway. Please, help me." Tobias looked at the man who had caused him so much pain. He thought about the years of humiliation. He thought about the cruel laughter. He thought about the dying donkey that was supposed to be his final shame. And then he thought about Grace. The donkey that should have died but didn't. The miracle that had come from what was meant to be a curse. He stood up, walked to where Grace was resting, and began to milk her. The golden liquid filled a small cup. He walked back to Marcus and held it out. "Drink this," Tobias said. Marcus looked at the cup. 10 at Tobias. Then at the cup again. "Why?" he asked. "After everything I did to you, why would you help me?" Tobias knelt down, so he was eye level with the broken man. "Because that's what grace means," he sighed softly. "It's not something you earn. It's something you receive when you don't deserve it. I received it from this donkey, and now I'm passing it on to you." Marcus took the cup with trembling hands and drank. What happened next? No one could fully explain. Marcus didn't suddenly become a saint. The years of cruelty couldn't be erased in a single night. But something shifted inside him. The bitterness that had poisoned his soul for so long began to loosen its grip. The emptiness that had consumed him began to fill with something new. Something that felt almost like hope. In the months that followed, Marcus sold his mansion and used the money to pay back everyone he had cheated over the years. He worked alongside the workers who now owned his factory, doing the same jobs he had once mocked. He never became rich again. He never regained his status or his power, but he found something far more valuable: peace. Tobias continued to care for Grace until the donkey's natural end came many years later. By then, he had become one of the most respected men in the region, not for his wealth or his status, but for his kindness, his wisdom, and his willingness to forgive those who had wronged him. People came from far and wide to seek his advice, to hear his story, to learn from a man who had been given nothing but had created a miracle. When Grace finally passed away, old and peaceful and surrounded by love, the entire town gathered for her burial. They laid her to rest on a hillside overlooking the valley, the same hillside where Marcus's mansion had once stood. A simple stone marked the grave with words that Tobias himself had chosen. "Here lies Grace." She was given as an insult, but received as a blessing. She was expected to die, but chose to live. She healed bodies, changed hearts, and proved that God's miracles often come through what the world throws away. In her, we learned that nothing is worthless in the hands of love. Years later, when Tobias himself was an old man, his grandchildren would gather around him and ask about the legendary donkey that had changed their family's fortunes. Tobias would smile, his eyes distant with memory, and tell them the story. But he always ended the same way. "Children," he would say, "the world will tell you that some things are worthless, that some people are worthless, that some creatures don't deserve love or care or attention. Don't believe it. The world doesn't know what it's throwing away. The world can't see what God has placed inside the broken and the dying and the discarded. Your job is not to listen to the world. Your job is to see with God's eyes. To love what others mock, to treasure what others throw away. Because you never know. The curse you receive today might be the miracle you need tomorrow. And somewhere in heaven, a small gray donkey named Grace was surely smiling because she had proven what the world refused to believe, that nothing given in cruelty can stop what God intends for good, that no life is too broken to be healed, that no gift is too small to become a miracle, and that sometimes the greatest treasures come wrapped in the most unlikely packages: a dying donkey, a discarded worker, and a grace that neither of them deserved, but both of them received. That's the real miracle of this story. Not the healing milk. Not the changed fortunes. Not even the fallen boss on his knees. The miracle is that love found a way. Through rejection, through pain, through years of suffering. Love found a way, and it always does. It always will. So the next time life hands you something that looks like a curse, remember Tobias. Remember Grace. Remember that God sees what we cannot see, knows what we cannot know, and works in ways we cannot understand. And trust that the dying donkey might be the door to your miracle. Trust that the worst day of your life might be the first day of your blessing. Trust that grace is always, always, always on its way. Friends, if this story touched your heart, drop a comment telling me what lesson it taught you. Let me know what country you're watching from. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. There's more waiting for you right on your screen. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.